Hi, this is Marie again, and we're still making selections. This time we're working on what I consider medium difficulty selections, and we're going to use our channels panel for most of it. Now, we've touched the channels panel before, but we haven't gotten completely into it as much as we might this time. Now, I've tried focus select on this and it doesn't select enough because some of the petals are out of focus, and the quick select tool gets it pretty close, but there's a lot of fine-tuning. So I thought perhaps channels might be the faster way to do this. So we go over to our channels palette, and again we look at the red and the green and the blue channel, and we are looking for the biggest contrast between the background and the flower, and I'm thinking that red is the biggest contrast between the two, background and the foreground there. So let's make a copy of this red channel by dragging it down to the new layer icon. Let's get out our levels adjustment. Remember, we can go to image adjustment levels, or we can Command or Control L to get this. Well, our dark is already pretty dark, so I'm going to start moving the white slider in towards the center. And it looks like at about halfway all I have here are pretty much black and white. I do have this little stem down here that needs some work, so I'm going to zoom in on that area. Oh, and I see as I zoom in it's not all black and all white. I'm going to grab my brush, tap the B key, and since black is my foreground color, I'm going to tap the X key to get white as the foreground color. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller with the left bracket key, and I'm going to click and shift click to get this stem back in. Now here on the edges, I don't want to take the time to paint really precisely, so I'm going to go over here and change the blend mode of my brush to overlay, and I'm going to make my brush bigger, and this time I'm using the Control Option slide left, and overlay means that the white is only going to show on gray areas or white areas. It's not going to affect the black areas. So there I've made those corrections very quickly without even trying hard. But I have to remember this to put the brush back into normal mode, or I'll not understand when I want to use it again why it isn't working correctly. Command or Control 0 will bring this back to fill the frame, and I want to make a selection of it. Control click on the thumbnail. Alright, we'll turn on the RGB layer again and go back over to the layers panel. Now we can check this with our quick mask to see if it's alright, and we can zoom in, and I'm basically holding down the Z key while I move my mouse down to the bottom right hand corner. And gee, oops, I see here I didn't quite get all of the stem. Well, that's okay. We'll small that brush up, and if we paint in black we can add the rest of the stem. Looks pretty good to me. Tap the Q key to get out of quick mask mode and hit the layer mask icon down at the bottom. Oh dear, we've got a problem, Houston. We have a blue line all the way around this particular flower, and it doesn't look good on this background. Well, I'm going to do a little cheat here. I'm going to right click on the layer mask to reselect it, and I'm going to go into select, modify, and I'm going to contract. And previous practice told me 2 pixels worked pretty good. I probably could push it with 3, but I'm going to leave it at 2 for the moment and say OK. That just sucks in the selection just a teeny bit. Control or Command 0 to see the whole thing. And what I want to do is add some more black. You see our layer here is black with white, and I need to add some more black. I could paint it in or I could go to select inverse and then fill with black, which is fewer mouse strokes. And since black is my background color at the moment, the shortcut, we could go edit, fill, and choose black, or the shortcut key or shortcut for background color would have been Command delete or Control backspace. Now as I deselect, and we'll zoom in again, we've pretty much got rid of that line. Gosh, maybe I want to try that one more time. Let's see if we can select reselect. And this time we're going to expand the selection because you notice we've got the black is what is selected. So we're going to expand the selection, and I'm going to go, I'll try 2 pixels again and say OK, and then we'll fill it with black. Sure enough, that took care of the last of those blue lines. Now, because this particular flower tends to be soft at the edges, the photographer used a relatively large aperture, which made a excuse me, a soft depth of field, or shallow depth of field, I'm sorry. And so these are going a little soft at the edges, and I've got a really tack sharp selection, and maybe that isn't the best thing to do. I'm just cleaning up that stem a little bit, it bothered me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here in the Properties panel and take my feather up about 1 pixel, probably no more than 2. And as you can see, here it is before, after, and here's before. And that teeny tiny feather makes the edges of the selection look more like match the focus of these petals. So that one went pretty well. This next one is not as easy to select. Every time there's a new selection tool, I pull this eagle out and see if I can select him better. Matter of fact, I found him back in the good old days of Photoshop. They used to give you some images to work on and some clip art, and he was back in the, I think, CS2 or CS3 clip art. So he's been a tool I've used for a long time. Let's go over to the Channels panel and see what we can get. Red, pretty nice between the head and the background, but the body and the background are the same color. Let's look at green. Same thing, green's good at the head, not so good at the body. And blue, well, that's best at the head, but not so good at the body. So let's make this selection in two parts. Let's duplicate the blue channel and make our levels adjustments. Make the blacks blacker and the whites whiter. Okay. And I am going to get my brush. I want white in my foreground. At the moment, because I'm working on the edges, I want overlay. Oh, I guess I don't. We need to have that black a little bit blacker. So I will go ahead and bring the black in a little bit farther. And it doesn't matter that we're losing body parts. We're only working with the head here. Okay, that works a little bit better. And here on the beak, we may have to go ahead and paint over it a couple of times to get rid of the gray. But the stuff that's truly black will never go away. So I'm going to change the blend mode back to normal. And we'll zoom in and make the brush smaller. And fill in the parts that were totally black before. I got a little gunk going on there. Oh, here's a little place that ought to probably be all white. Okay, now let's change to our black brush, tap the X key, and for the moment I'm going to try the overlay mode right here. And it's picking up the gray pixels, but it's not doing anything for the white pixels. So I will have to go ahead and change that to normal and paint around this edge. And I'm going to use my shift click short strokes to move around that edge. Just oops, didn't want to do that. And we'll make that just a little bit smaller and get this right in here. And maybe get rid of that. Okay. And then I want a very small brush in white to get those chin hairs there. Alright. Back to my black brush. Back to the big black brush. And we're okay using normal away from the edges, but when we get close up to the edges, we want to put that overlay so we can't paint over the edges. And change it back to normal before we forget about it. Alright, let's make the selection by Control or Command clicking on it. And this time, because we have to make a two-part selection, one for the head and one for the body, I'm going to save this selection. We go to Select, Save Selection, and I'm going to call this Head. And say OK, and you notice it made a new copy right here that we can make a selection of that says Head. Well, I'll deselect this, turn off this blue copy, I'll go back to RGB, and then look at the red. Now we're looking for differences between the body and the background, and it looks like green is going to give us the most difference there. So let's duplicate the green layer, Command or Control L for the levels, and I'm going to try and make the background as white as I can, and then I'm going to move in and get the feathers darker and make the background a little lighter. Don't worry about the head, we're only worried about the body right here. Okay. So, let's start with black and get the main parts here, and then go to overlay mode to get here at the edge between the black and the white. Now let's switch to white, tap the X key, and we'll go ahead. Now sometimes, remember, we have to, for darker grays, we have to tap a couple of times. And then for that totally black stuff, we have to go back to normal. And again, we're going to make the selection, but remember, we need to select it selects the white and not the black, so we need to inverse this, Control or Command I. Oh, and there's some little black speckles in the white, so we'll put that there, and there's a little white speckles in the black, so we'll fix that. And then we will select it, Control or Command I, and again we are going, again we're going to save the selection and call it body, and sure enough we have another little channel show up that has the body on it. Well, I'm going to go tap the RGB layer and go back to layers, but before I'm ready to do my layer mask, I see that this right here isn't as good as it might be, so I'm going to go in quick mask mode, zoom in, smallen up this brush here, and shift click along that edge to get closer to what it really is. And while we're playing with this, let's look at this edge, see if this is okay. And here we're going to be wanting to paint with white because, nope, I guess that is green. Surprise, surprise. You know what we ought to do? We ought to change this to a different color. Maybe a bright pink. Oh, that's much better. So we can paint it. Now we can see which is background and which is selection. So this time we'll be painting in black just to pull that last little bit of feathering in. And then tap Q again. We'll go to full size. Now we want to add the selection that we have for the head. So we go to Select, Load Selection. And down here it gives us several options to choose from. Well, we want to add to the selection, and we want to pick the head as the channel that we want to add. So we'll say OK, and now we've got the eagle all selected. Now there's some stuff in here that looks like we didn't overlap well enough. So I'm just going to grab my lasso tool by tapping the L key, and I'm going to hold down the Shift to add to the selection and draw a circle around these areas that didn't get selected earlier that should have been. And now I'm ready to go down to the layer mask icon and tap it. So there we go. We've got, darn, a really good looking selection. I'm almost afraid to zoom in on this. This is one of the best selections I've made with this. But I see as I look in here, there's little green fringes, and if I turn off the background, which is kind of greenish, it's really very noticeable. So I want to make that, get rid of the green on the edges. I'm going to go to the Properties, click on Mask Edge, and the Refine Dial, can't talk. The Refine Radius tool here, and I'm going to make that a little bit smaller and bring it around in the direction that the feathers are growing. And if you want to see what this looks like, I'll show it to you on white here. Whoops, not black and white, on white. And you can see as we do this, we're getting rid of that green cast. Basically, the refine radius lets us make those translucent. Another option we could try is the shift edge, but it really doesn't seem to do as much good, so we'll leave that at 0. Doesn't seem to do as much good as it does the refine radius tool. Now we could use our channel trick, but you know, we've already been in there trying for the channels and not having any luck. So I don't think that trick would work here, to be quite honest. Alright, so we're okay. Let's turn all this back on. And we've got a little problem here where we painted around the beak and we probably shouldn't have. And there's a couple ways we can do this. We can make sure the layer mask is active, and we can make selections again with this lasso tool and fill it with black. Black is the foreground color, so it'll be Alt Backspace Option Delete and then deselect. Or we can get our black brush and work on this area, and the brush needs to be a lot smaller through here. And again, our click and shift click may be the way to go. And we'll go all the way around the outside of the brush, or outside of the beak, getting rid of that little green edge that we shouldn't ought to have. And here I need to switch to the brush in white because I've taken out too much beak. And then what I went over to get that sharp point, I can take out in black. See, there we go. We now have our eagle all set and ready to go in his new background. We still have one more movie to go, and that will be some really hard, tedious selections. And you'll find, depending on what you want to do, sometimes it is really tedious. So thanks, and I'll see you again in a little bit.